At no point in UFC history has the title picture looked this confused. Champions don't want to defend, interim champions can't fight, super fights matter more than rankings, and somehow this is all happening at the same time. This isn't chaos by accident. This is the UFC's 2026 title picture.
If you care about where this sport is actually headed, subscribe to MMA Arena. This is where the real stories behind the fights get told.
UFC heavyweight division is supposed to be simple. Big men, big stakes, one champion, one clear line. For decades, it was the division that defined legitimacy. When the heavyweight belt moved, the sport moved with it. When it stalled, everything felt off. Right now, it's worse than off. It's frozen. On paper, the UFC has a heavyweight champion. In reality, it has an interim champion who can't defend, a former champion who may never fight again, and a president who keeps changing the story depending on the week. The most important belt in MMA has turned into a philosophical argument instead of a sporting reality. It starts with Tom Aspinall. Aspinall did everything right. He came back from a catastrophic knee injury, ran through contenders, and became interim champion in dominant fashion. No controversy, no shortcuts, no marketing gimmicks. He was fast, technical, decisive, everything the division had been missing. And yet, the moment he won the belt, the division stopped moving. Instead of unification, fans got silence. Instead of timelines, they got vague sound bites. And then came the comments that shattered any illusion of clarity. Dana White publicly questioned Aspinall's readiness, publicly minimized the injury, publicly suggested that if you can't see properly, you can't fight, full stop, as if medical recovery is a moral failure rather than a process. The subtext was clear. The belt didn't matter unless the UFC decided it mattered. Hovering over all of this is Jon Jones, the greatest fighter of all time, a legend, a problem. Jones returned to heavyweight, won the title quickly, and then disappeared into injury, negotiations, and uncertainty. When asked about his future, he didn't sound like a reigning champion. He sounded like someone closing a chapter. At one point, Dana White famously said the chances of Jon Jones fighting again in the UFC were 1 in a billion. Not 1 in a million, 1 in a billion. That isn't promotional hype, that's expectation management. That's preparing the audience for absence. And yet, the belt remains attached to Jones' name in spirit, while Aspinall holds a version of it in limbo. This is where the heavyweight division breaks logic. In any functioning sport, an interim champion exists for one reason: to fight the champion. That's the deal. That's the promise. It's supposed to simplify chaos, not extend it. But here, the interim belt became a holding pattern, a way to keep content moving without resolving the core problem. Fans are told to be patient, fighters are told to stay ready, rankings are told to wait their turn. But patience only works when there's direction. Instead, the UFC keeps the heavyweight division in suspense because suspense sells better than certainty. Every update becomes a headline. Every non-decision becomes debate fuel. Will Jones fight? Will Aspinall wait? Will the belt be stripped? Will there be another interim? The problem is that suspense eventually turns into fatigue. Heavyweight used to be the anchor division. Now it feels like a side quest orbiting one man's legacy and another man's injury timeline. Contenders can't plan, matchmakers can't commit, fans can't invest emotionally because nothing sticks long enough to matter. Even worse, the messaging keeps shifting. One week, Aspinall is the future. The next, he's medically questionable. One week, Jones is returning soon. The next, retirement is treated like an inevitability. There is no single narrative because the UFC doesn't want one. A single narrative forces resolution. Resolution forces decisions. Decisions create winners and losers, and the UFC prefers optionality. But optionality comes at a cost. When the heavyweight belt feels symbolic instead of functional, it weakens every division beneath it. If the biggest title can sit untouched for years, why should any contender believe the system is merit-based? If an interim champion can't unify, why should rankings matter at all? This is why fans are angrier now during previous heavyweight droughts. It's not just inactivity, it's the sense that inactivity is intentional. The UFC isn't waiting for the division to heal, it's waiting for the moment that benefits the business most. And in the meantime, the heavyweight division is paused in a state that serves no one except the machine itself. Tom Aspinall is ready. John Jones is uncertain. Dana White controls the narrative. And the heavyweight division, the crown jewel of combat sports, sits frozen not because there are no fighters, but because clarity is less profitable than confusion. This isn't a mistake. It's the opening chapter of a system that no longer prioritizes resolution, only leverage. And once you see that, the rest of the UFC's title chaos starts to make a disturbing kind of sense.
If the heavyweight division is frozen, the rest of the UFC is quietly eroding from within. Not through scandals, not through bad fights, but through a growing pattern that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Champions who don't actually want to stay in their divisions. Belts used to mean obligation. Now they mean options. The clearest example sits at the center of the chaos, Khamzat Chimaev. On paper, Chimaev is the middleweight champion the UFC spent years trying to manufacture. Undefeated, violent, charismatic, polarizing. He checks every box. But almost immediately after claiming gold, the messaging shifted. Instead of talking about defenses, Chimaev talked about possibilities, weight classes, legacy, movement. The problem isn't ambition. The problem is abandonment. Middleweight is already one of the UFC's most congested divisions. Ranked contenders have been circling each other for years, waiting for a champion to give them a target. And now that the belt finally has a dominant figure, the division is effectively paused because that figure won't commit to staying. A champion who won't defend doesn't just stall his own division, he freezes everyone beneath him. Fighters can't peak at the right time. Matchmakers can't build narratives. Fans can't follow a path. Instead of a ladder, the division becomes a waiting room. The UFC pretends this is normal because it benefits them. A mobile champion gives the promotion leverage. It allows them to dangle super fights. It creates flexibility. It shifts focus away from rankings and towards spectacle. But flexibility is not structure. And without structure, belts lose meaning. This problem doesn't end with Chimaev. Alex Pereira is the most extreme example of how this mindset has been normalized. Middleweight, light heavyweight, now openly discussing heavyweight. Every move is framed as legacy building. Every jump is praised as bravery. But what gets lost is the damage left behind. When Pereira leaves a division, contenders don't get crowned, they get stranded. Light heavyweight, once revived by Pereira's presence, now risks becoming a ghost town again. Fighters train for years for a title shot that may never come because the champion is already mentally gone. And the UFC encourages this. Why? Because double champs sell better than defending champs. Because moving up creates moments. Because defending against ranked contenders doesn't trend the same way. But here's the hidden consequence. When champions stop defending, rankings stop mattering. If belts are temporary accessories instead of long-term commitments, then the system becomes arbitrary. Whoever the UFC wants to push gets pushed. Whoever fits the narrative gets skipped ahead. This is why fans increasingly feel disconnected. Not because the fights are bad, but because the outcomes don't lead anywhere. A win used to mean progress. Now it often means waiting. Even Islam Makhachev, one of the most technically dominant champions in the sport, is pulled into this gravitational shift. Instead of cleaning out his division, conversations immediately turn to welterweight, to Kamaru Usman, to super fights, to cross-division glory. Again, ambition isn't the issue. The issue is that every champion now sees their belt as a stepping stone instead of an endpoint. And once that mentality becomes standard, the sport stops behaving like a sport. Champions are supposed to be anchors. Instead, they're becoming travelers. The UFC's defense is always the same. These are the biggest fights possible. And in isolation, that's true. But when every division is waiting on a champion's next move, the entire ecosystem slows down. The promotion can survive this, the fighters cannot. Careers are short, windows are brief, timing is everything. When champions delay defenses or flirt with other divisions, contenders age out waiting for opportunities that never come. This is how divisions rot without collapsing. Quietly, gradually, strategically. The UFC didn't lose control of its title structure. It traded it away for flexibility, leverage, and viral moments. And now it's facing the side effect, a roster full of elite fighters with nowhere to go. The belts still exist, the divisions still exist, but the commitment, the idea that being champion means standing your ground, is fading fast. And once that expectation disappears, the UFC isn't a ladder anymore. It's a carousel, and the riders don't get to choose when it stops.
At this point, the chaos stops feeling accidental. When champions won't defend, divisions stall. When divisions stall, contenders wait. And when contenders wait too long, the UFC stops pretending the rankings matter at all. This is where everything converges. The UFC's modern title picture isn't broken because of injuries or bad luck. It's broken because the promotion no longer treats the rankings as a pathway. They treat them as decoration. The clearest symptom of that collapse is how title shots are now awarded. Merit used to be the argument, then it became timing. Now it's momentum, or worse, attention. Fighters are rewarded not for who they beat, but for how loudly the internet reacts to their name. That's how you get title conversations that skip half a division. Islam Makhachev doesn't need to clean out lightweight before people start discussing welterweight. Alexander Volkanovski doesn't need to face the clear next contender because a better story exists. Tom Aspinall becomes interim champion, yet the division still orbits someone else entirely. At heavyweight, this contradiction is impossible to ignore. You have an interim champion in Aspinall, young, active, dangerous, and yet the division behaves as if the belt doesn't exist. Fans are told to wait, fighters are told to be patient. Meanwhile, the title picture remains frozen in theory and chaotic in practice. This isn't how sports work. Interim titles were designed as temporary solutions. In the UFC, they've become long-term placeholders. And once that happens, the legitimacy of the belt erodes. But heavyweight is only the loudest example. Across the roster, contenders are watching their earned positions become irrelevant. Win streaks don't guarantee shots. Rankings don't guarantee opportunity. Sometimes losing doesn't even move you backward, if your name is big enough. That's how you get matchups like Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje even enter the conversation. On paper, it makes no sense. Skill gap, experience gap, risk imbalance, but from a business perspective, it's perfect. One man brings attention, the other brings credibility. The rankings are just collateral damage. And this is the moment fans feel it most. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The UFC is no longer pretending this is a sport-first structure. It's an entertainment-first system with sporting aesthetics layered on top. Rankings give the illusion of order, but the decisions are driven elsewhere. Star power, marketability, timing, narrative. The fighters know it. The fans know it. The promotion just doesn't say it out loud. This is why every division feels unstable at the same time. It's not coincidence, it's design. Belts are used to create leverage. Interim titles are used to buy time. Super fights are used to override logic. And when everything is flexible, nothing is fair. The long-term cost of this isn't just fan frustration, it's trust. Fans invest in journeys. They follow contenders through wins and losses, believing there's a destination at the end. When that destination keeps moving, investment drops. You stop caring who's ranked third. You stop tracking eliminators. You stop believing the ladder exists. And once that happens, the UFC risks something far more dangerous than backlash: apathy. The irony is that the UFC is more profitable than ever. The business model works, the cards sell, the machine keeps moving, but the emotional connection, the thing that turns fights into eras, is weakening. Great divisions are built on clarity. Great champions are defined by defenses. Great rivalries require structure. Right now, the UFC has moments instead of momentum. Everything feels temporary.
Every title reign feels like a pit stop. Every contender feels replaceable. And maybe that's the point, because a system where no one is bigger than the brand also means no one is protected by it. Fighters are interchangeable, belts are movable, history becomes flexible. But fans aren't stupid. They can feel when something has shifted. This doesn't feel like chaos by accident. It feels like chaos by design. And the question isn't whether the UFC can keep doing this. They clearly can. The real question is whether a sport can survive when its structure becomes optional. That's not a debate about one fighter, or one division, or one year. That's the future of the UFC's identity itself. If you made it this far, drop a comment and tell me honestly, are UFC rankings meaningless now, or is this just evolution? Subscribe to MMA Arena if you want breakdowns that don't stop at the highlights.